She said my recipes were dusty, too old to matter. Then she stole them, every handwritten card, every flavor of my childhood. She thought I'd be too soft to fight back. But she forgot. Those dishes made me. And I'd rather serve revenge warm and in hardcover. They say food brings people together. But in my case, it's what tore us apart. Not the food itself, no. It was what the food stood for. History, memory, love. And the moment my daughter-in-law called my recipes outdated, I knew something was changing. Something ugly. I'm 75 years old. My hands aren't as quick as they used to be. And my knees ache when I stand too long. But those hands, they've folded pierogi dough through tears. They've rubbed spices into roasts that fed grieving neighbors. They've kneaded life into loaves when we had nothing but flour and hope. I live alone in a quiet town in upstate New York. In the same little house my late husband Carl and I built together over 50 years ago. It still smells like cinnamon in the winter and tomato basil in the summer. That's how I keep his memory alive. But lately my kitchen has been too quiet, that is. Until my son David and his wife Madison started visiting again. At first I thought it was sweet. Madison hovering near the stove, asking questions like, "Is this how you make your Sunday pot roast? What's in that spice blend you use for the ribs?" I'd laugh, flatter. "It's nothing fancy," I'd say, even though it was. And though I'd spent decades getting it just right. I'd pull out one of my worn index cards, yellowed from time and tomato paste, and hand it over. "You can take this one," I'd offer. "You'll like it." She'd smile, her lip gloss shimmering under the kitchen light, and say thank you. Every time. I didn't realize I was handing her more than ingredients. I was giving her legacy, and she was taking it, bit by bit. Then came the moment that flipped everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. Madison and I were in the kitchen, while David fixed a leaking pipe under the sink. I had just pulled a batch of my mother's lemon tea cookies from the oven. The scent floated through the whole house, sweet, citrusy, warm. Madison bit into one, and with a small chuckle said, "These are cute, kind of. Nostalgic. You know, like something from a church potluck back in the 50s. I stopped wiping down the counter. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked. She waved it off. "Oh no, not bad. Just outdated. Like not what people look for anymore." I didn't say anything, but my heart did. It clenched, because those weren't just cookies. They were my mother's. They were Christmas mornings and rainy days, and after-school surprises. They were comfort and pride, and Madison had reduced them to a punchline. Still, I tried to brush it off. Not everyone values the past the same way. But then a week later something strange happened. A friend from my quilting club texted me, "Hey Elaine, did you know your daughter-in-law's launching a cookbook? Looks like your old recipes. Congrats." I stared at the message. Cookbook? What cookbook? I opened the link. There it was. Heritage Modern Timeless Recipes with a Modern Twist by Madison Lane. I clicked through the preview pages. My buttermilk biscuits. My squash soup, even my mother's lemon tea cookies, now labeled Sunshine Citrus Bites. I stood in my kitchen, stunned. She had changed the names, tweaked a word here and there. But the bones, the heart, they were mine. And worse, now they were hers. When David and Madison stopped by the following weekend, I didn't greet them at the door with cinnamon rolls like usual. Instead, I handed Madison the preview copy I printed. She blinked. "Oh, you saw it already. You're calling it your own," I said quietly. "I adapted them," she replied, eyes narrowing slightly. They needed a refresh. I mean, the original versions were just. David stepped in. Mom, it's not a big deal. It's just a passion project. Madison's worked hard. I held up a hand. I've worked hard too. For 50, I didn't write them down for money. I wrote them to pass down, and I trusted you. Madison looked uncomfortable. Well, you never copyrighted anything. It's not like I stole it. I stared at her for a long moment. Not like you stole it. That sentence rang in my ears for days. They left that night without hugging me. Goodbye. And I stood in my empty kitchen and made my squash soup. Not for comfort, not for nostalgia, but for resolve. Because if Madison was going to profit off my life's work, then I would remind her exactly whose name those recipes really belonged to. Not hers, mine. So I opened the drawer where I kept a notebook, tattered brown leather cover, pages filled with flour-smudged notes. I hadn't looked at it in years, but now I flipped it open with fresh eyes. Inside were not just recipes but stories, anecdotes, moments, like how my peach cobbler once won me first place at the county fair in how my chili recipe saved Carl's broken heart after his father passed, how the ugly meatloaf my son used to hate became the only thing he requested after college finals. This was more than food. It was a memoir, and I was done letting someone else write my story. The next morning I didn't bake, I didn't cook, I didn't even make tea. Instead, I sat at my dining table in front of a blank Microsoft Word document. My hands shook a little, not from nerves but from age. Still, I placed them firmly on the keyboard, because if Madison could call my recipes hers and slap a glossy cover on them, then I could do the same, only honestly. Only better. I opened my old leather notebook. It still smelled faintly of nutmeg. The first page held my mother's handwriting, faded and curly. It said, "Love feeds longer than bread ever can." I read it twice. Then I started typing. That first day, I typed 10 pages straight. My fingers weren't fast, but they were steady. I began with my peach cobbler, but instead of just listing ingredients, I wrote about the first time I made it. August 1973, the summer fair, Carl wearing that ridiculous green straw hat, and the blue ribbon that hung on our kitchen wall for years. By lunch, I was smiling, because something clicked. This wasn't just revenge. This was me, taking back my voice. A week passed. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not even my best friend, Nancy, who called every Thursday to gossip about who in the quilting circle had arthritis worse than hers. But I did reach out to a local writers group online. There was a young woman named Elise, who helped retired folks self-publish books. She was in her 30s, had purple glasses, and a laugh that made me feel younger than I was. We had a Zoom call. She looked at me kindly and said, "Elaine, this is beautiful. These aren't just recipes. This is legacy. This is your story." I nodded. That's exactly what she stole from me. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "Smart girl, I can help you format, edit, and get it on Amazon," she said. "Do you want a hard copy option too?" "Yes," I said. "A real one, for shelves." Because I didn't want this to live only online. I wanted Madison to see it at her local bookstore. I wanted her to feel that twist in her stomach that I'd been nursing for weeks. Meanwhile, Madison's cookbook launch was making noise. I started seeing her all over Instagram, standing next to a fake brick wall, with a rolling pin in one hand and a smug grin on her face. Her followers wrote things like, "Oh my gosh, these recipes feel so authentic. Love the vintage twist. Did you grow up making these?" And she'd reply, "Totally." Inspired by family traditions, I updated myself. My hands clenched when I read that. Updated? She'd thrown rosemary on my mama's roast chicken and renamed it Woodland Herb Bliss. That's Not updating, that's vandalism. Still, I didn't comment, I didn't like, I didn't share, because my time was coming. By the third week, Elise and I had over 60 recipes polished and formatted. We called the book From My Table to Yours. A lifetime of recipes and the stories that made them. Simple, honest, true. The cover was a photo of my kitchen table. No filter, just the warm wood, the small flour stain in the corner. I never bothered to scrub, and my mother's old rolling pin sitting on a tea towel. We hit publish on a Tuesday morning. By Friday, the paperback version was available, and I ordered 10 copies. One for me, one for the library, one for Nancy, and 7 for strategic delivery. On Sunday, I went to David and Madison's house. David opened the door. He looked surprised to see me. "Hi, Mom," he said. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," I replied, and held up a brown paper bag. "Just wanted to drop something off." Madison walked in from the kitchen. She was wearing a blush-colored apron. Her hair was up in a high ponytail. "Oh," she said slowly. "Hey, Elaine." I pulled out a copy of the book and placed it on the entry table. She looked down, read the title, then read my name. Her face went pale. "Is this?" "Yes," I said. "That's the original." She glanced at David, who looked like someone just told him his car had been keyed. I turned to leave, but paused. "You were right, Madison," I said, calm and steady. "Outdated recipes don't sell, but real ones, real stories. Turns out, people want the truth." 3 days later, I found out Madison's publisher had dropped her. Apparently, someone had reported similarities between her recipes and a recently published memoir-style cookbook by a woman named Elaine Monroe. The complaint included timestamps and ingredient overlap. Even one recipe, my sweet potato pie, was lifted word for word, only with a different crust. It was enough, but I didn't stop there. I took one of my remaining copies to the local bookstore, the one Madison used for her launch event. I spoke to the owner, a tall, thoughtful man named Greg, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and remembered my husband from church. He took one look through the book and said, "We'd be proud to carry this." And just like that, my cookbook stood in the same place hers had been. Only mine didn't have glossy photos or lavender-colored fonts. It had stories, and heart, and my name. You know, it's funny, Madison never apologized, not directly, but word got around. She deleted the cookbook's website, stopped posting recipes online, went quiet for a while. And David, well, he called me a few weeks later. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know she was using your exact work. I should have asked." I didn't say it's too late. I didn't yell. I just told him the truth. "You chose not to see it. But I forgive you. Because forgiveness is like cornbread, best served warm. But even when it's cold, it still feeds." After the bookstore put my cookbook on their front display, I thought I'd feel relief, closure, maybe. But something strange happened instead. People started recognizing me. At the grocery store, a young woman stopped me near the spice aisle. "Excuse me," she said, squinting at my face. "Are you Elaine Monroe?" I blinked. "Yes." She lit up. "I just bought your cookbook from Riverbend Books. I made the apple butter last night, and my boyfriend said it tasted like his grandmother's kitchen." "Thank you." I nearly cried right there between the cinnamon and the cayenne. "You're very welcome," I said, my voice shaking slightly. That was my husband's favorite recipe. When she left, I stood there for a moment, stunned. Madison had taken my work and tried to stamp her name over it, like some trendy brand, but I had taken it back. And now people were tasting my history again. By the end of that month, I'd received 10 handwritten letters, some from local readers who remembered me from church potlucks, some from strangers across the country. One came from a woman in Montana. Dear Mrs. Monroe, my grandmother passed away last year. Your cornbread recipe made me feel like she was in the kitchen with me again. Thank you for bringing her back to me, even for a moment. Love, Maria G. I pressed that letter between the pages of my notebook like a flower, because that's what Madison never understood. This wasn't just food, it was resurrection. Meanwhile, Madison had gone radio silent. Her social media went from bubbly posts about innovative home cooking to blurry photos of lattes and vague quotes about reinvention. One evening, I got a text from David. She's thinking of taking a break from recipe development. Just a heads up, from the man who once told me, Mom, they're just cookies. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because David had made his choice back then, and so had I. Elise, the young woman who helped me publish the book, invited me to speak at a local writers' club for seniors. We'd love to hear about your process, she said, and how you turned something painful into something powerful. I was hesitant at first. I wasn't a speaker. I was a cook, a wife, a mother. But the day came, and I found myself standing in front of 15 older folks in folding chairs, all sipping lukewarm coffee. I wore my good lavender cardigan and pinned on the brooch. Carl gave me an 85. I looked at the crowd and said, I wrote my first recipe when I was 4. It was for banana bread. And I wrote it on the back of a church bulletin because I didn't have a real notebook. Years later, I gave that recipe to my daughter-in-law, thinking she'd cherish it. She didn't. She published it as her own. So I wrote this book to remind her and myself that I'm not done yet. My story still matters. And so does yours. They clapped. Some cried. I did too. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. The book had sold over 2. Not bad for an outdated little recipe collection from a woman who still uses a landline. I clicked into the reviews. Hundreds of 5-star ratings. But one caught my eye. These recipes taste like home. And the stories feel like they were written by someone who's lived a full, loving life. Thank you for sharing your kitchen with us. That's when I knew my revenge wasn't in ruining Madison's fake career. It was in reclaiming my real one. A few days later, Nancy came over with a pie she borrowed from the grocery store bakery. She slammed it down on my table and said, I can't bake worth a damn, but I read your book cover to cover. I laughed. You don't even cook. No. She said, but I know a good story when I read one. And girl, you served justice with a side of spice. We drank tea, gossiped, and laughed about the quilting circle. And for the first time in weeks, I felt normal again. Whole. Then something strange happened. Madison called me. Not David, Madison. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Hi, Elaine, she said. I heard about the book. Congratulations. I stayed silent. I just wanted to say, she continued, I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was honoring you in a way. I bit back the anger rising in my chest. By erasing my name? I asked. She didn't answer. You could have collaborated with me. You could have given credit. Instead, you called my recipes outdated and claimed them as your own. I didn't mean, but you did it anyway, I said. And now you're reaping what you baked. Long pause. Then, I've returned the advance to my publisher. I took the website down. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. Finally, I said, thank you. I accept your apology. But that doesn't mean I forget what you did, she sniffed. I know. And with that, she hung up. No excuses. No tears. Just the quiet sound of a woman who finally realized what legacy tastes like when it's not hers to claim. The next Sunday, David came by alone. He brought flowers, daisies. My favorite. He looked tired. We sat on the porch and didn't speak for a while. Then he turned to me and said, "You've always had more strength than I gave you credit for." I smiled softly. "I've always had more recipes too." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was wrong to stand by while she did that," he said. "I think I wanted her to succeed so badly. I didn't care how she got there." I nodded. It's easy to look away when it benefits someone you love. "But you didn't look away," he said. "No," I said. I looked directly at the mess, and then I cleaned it up with a hardcover spine and copyright. We both laughed then, and for the first time in a while I felt like a mother again. Not someone to tolerate, not someone to borrow from, but someone to respect. By the time fall arrived, my book was in its third reprint. I didn't even know what that meant until Elise called and said, "Congratulations, Elaine, third print run." It means demand is still strong. I stared at the phone and blinked. "People are still buying it." She laughed. "Yes, ma'am, they are. You're a hit, a hit." At 75 years old, after being dismissed, called outdated and nearly erased by my own family, I was a hit. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a while. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, casting a soft glow on my old table, the one I'd rolled dough on for decades. And I thought about all the meals, all the stories, all the love that had simmered in this kitchen. Madison had tried to steal it, but I had turned it into something no one could ever take again. I was sitting in my rocking chair that afternoon when I got another surprise. A letter, not an email, not a text, a real stamped envelope. It was from a culinary school in Vermont. Apparently, one of their instructors had bought my book and brought it to class. Now they were inviting me to speak. They wanted me, Elaine Monroe, to talk to their students about legacy in cooking and the preservation of culinary heritage. I laughed out loud. Me? A guest speaker? I wasn't a professional chef. I didn't have a Michelin star or reality show, but I had something better. I had real roots, real memory, real food. I called Elise. "Do you think I can actually do this?" "Elaine," she said, "they're not asking for a performance. They're asking for truth, and no one serves that better than you." So I packed my best cardigan, my orthopedic shoes, and a little container of lemon tea cookies. Just in case. When I arrived at the culinary school, I was overwhelmed. Stainless steel kitchens, tall white hats, students with knives sharper than my sass on a bad day. But they welcomed me with open arms. They sat quietly while I read the first chapter of my book. They asked questions about flavor balance and food memory. And then one young woman, maybe 19, hair dyed blue and eyes full of fire, raised her hand. "Did anyone ever try to take credit for your work before?" The room went still. I looked at her and said, "Yes." And I let them, for a while. Because I thought that's what love was, giving, even when it hurts. But then I remembered that love without respect isn't love at all. It's theft with a smile. The girl nodded slowly, like she was swallowing something deeper than soup. That moment stayed with me, because it wasn't just about food anymore. It was about worth, and finally realizing I didn't need anyone else to validate mine. I came home to a mailbox full of royalty checks. Elise had set up everything: paperbacks, ebooks, even a small run of signed collector's editions. Apparently, people liked the idea of owning something handwritten by the author. I sat at my desk and looked at the stack of envelopes. Each one felt like a repayment. Not in dollars, though, that helped, but in dignity. Madison had once laughed and said, "No one buys cookbooks anymore, unless they're influencers." Well, I wasn't an influencer, but I had influence. About a week later, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Madison again. This time her voice was quieter, softer. "I saw your interview," she said. "What interview?" "Channel 4. You were on the morning segment last Thursday. Elise sent in a press release." "Oh, I'd forgotten they recorded that." Madison cleared her throat. "You looked proud, like yourself again." I didn't know what to say to that. Then she continued, "I've been thinking about what you said, about love without respect." I waited. "I'm sorry I disrespected you," she said. "Not just with the book, but by acting like you didn't matter." Her voice cracked a little, and despite everything, part of me softened. Because even when we're wronged, we still carry the hope that someone will finally understand. "I forgive you," I said. A long pause. "I want to make things right," she said. "Could we maybe work together?" I nearly dropped the phone. "On what?" I asked cautiously. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'd like to learn from you. For real this time. No edits. No rebranding. Just learn." I stared out my window. The backyard was golden with October leaves. The wind carried the scent of earth and wood smoke and peace. "I'll think about it," I said. "For now, I'm still writing." "Another book?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "But this one's about grandmothers and how much history they carry in their aprons." She let out a small laugh. "I'll be the first to buy it." "No," I replied gently. "You'll be the first to read it, but not until it's finished." That night, I took out my old notebook again, flipped past the cornbread, the pie crusts, the holiday stuffing, and I began to write new recipes, not ones handed down to me, ones I created on my own. Things I never dared to try when I was younger, because I didn't believe anyone would care. Now I knew better. People did care, not just about the food, but about the story that came with it, and mine wasn't done yet. Later that week, Nancy came over with a casserole dish, and her usual sass. "So," she said, "you gonna make Madison your apprentice now, or what?" I laughed. "Maybe, if she can tell the difference between oregano and thyme this time." Nancy grinned. "Well, just don't let her near your mac and cheese. That's sacred. I'm writing it into the will," I joked. "Whoever ruins this recipe forfeits the house." She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her iced tea. It's strange how revenge can bloom into something softer when you give it room. I didn't set out to ruin Madison. I set out to reclaim myself. And in doing that, I built something bigger than spite. I built a legacy. With every page, every bite, every memory turned into ink. I was never outdated, just underestimated. And now, they know better. The first time I walked past my own book on a bookstore shelf, I nearly cried, not because it was there, but because no one had noticed me looking at it. A young couple stood nearby, flipping through the pages. The man pointed to my cornbread recipe and said, "My grandma used to make it just like this." The woman nodded. "It's nostalgic, huh? Like something from a real kitchen." I stood there, arms folded, silent as stone. That's all I ever wanted. Not fame, not flattery, just to be seen as real. For so long, Madison tried to make me feel like I was from another era, like I had nothing left to offer. But here I was, in print, in homes, in hearts. The old me might have baked her a pie and called it even. The new me, I was just getting started. That evening, I lit a cinnamon candle and opened a fresh notebook. This one wasn't for old recipes. It was for new ideas. My ideas. For too long, I'd been cooking what others expected of me. Now I was ready to experiment. Peach rosemary shortbread, savory pumpkin tart with caramelized onions, sweet tea granita, None of it existed in my mother's books or Madison's stolen copies. These belonged to me, and you know what? It felt good. No, it felt powerful. I hadn't heard from Madison in about 3 weeks, which I was fine with. But one morning, I got an unexpected delivery on my doorstep, a bouquet of sunflowers and a card for the recipes I never earned, and the woman I'm still learning from. Madison, I read it 3 times before setting it aside. Forgiveness is a slow thing, but maybe, there was hope yet. Elise called later that day. Elaine, she said, breathless. You just got picked up by a food blogger network. They want to interview you for a holiday feature. I was stunned. Me, yes, ma'am. They said you're exactly what their readers want. Authentic, warm, and full of character. Character. That used to be code for old, but now it felt like a crown. The interview happened in my kitchen. 2 young women with cameras and clipboards came in, all smiles and fast-talking energy. I wore my pale blue blouse, my best lavender cardigan, and a fresh apron that said, "Still stirring." We talked for hours. They asked about my early baking days, my family, my publishing journey, and finally, carefully they asked, "Is it true your daughter-in-law tried to publish your recipes first?" I smiled. Let's just say she had a taste before the meal was ready. They laughed. I laughed, because I had nothing left to hide anymore. No bitterness, just facts. And frosting. After they left, I sat at the table, sipping chamomile tea. Nancy called. "Well," she asked, "are you a TV star yet?" "Not quite," I said. "But my lemon bars might be." We both cackled. "You know," she said more gently, "I haven't seen you this alive in years." And she was right. Revenge had lit a fire in me. But purpose kept it burning. Later that week, the article went live. They titled it, "The Grandmother Who Reclaimed Her Kitchen and Her Voice." It went viral. I started receiving speaking requests. Libraries, book clubs, even a university women's history panel. At first, I turned them down. I didn't think anyone needed to hear more from me. But Nancy, bless her nosy heart, said, "If someone offered you a microphone, don't whisper into it. Speak." So I said yes, and I spoke about food, about family, about the danger of letting yourself be silenced. Because that's what Madison tried to do. Not just take my recipes, erase me. But now, I was louder than ever. David stopped by a few days later. He brought a casserole, store-bought, of course. But the gesture was kind. He sat across from me, picking at the corner of the dish like a nervous boy. "I wanted to say thank you," he mumbled. "For what?" I asked, surprised. "For not pushing me away, for not cutting me off completely. Even when I probably deserved it." I looked at him carefully. "I was angry," I said honestly. "But I never stopped loving you." He nodded, eyes wet. "I know, and I'm sorry I let it go as far as it did. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Sometimes peace comes in the quiet." 2 days later, I got a package in the mail. Inside was a book proposal. Typed. Formatted. At the top, "Legacy Rewritten. Recipes from a Daughter Learning to Honor Her Roots" by Madison Monroe. Beneath it was a sticky note in her handwriting. "This time I want your name beside mine." I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the phone. "Madison," I said, "let's talk." We met at a small cafe near the park. No cameras, no microphones. Just 2 women who'd once shared a kitchen and nearly lost a family over flour. She apologized again. I believed her this time. And when she asked, "Will you work on this with me?" I paused. Then said, "Only if every recipe we include has its story." She smiled. "Deal. Because recipes without stories are just instructions. But recipes with soul, those live forever." I don't know what this new book will become. Maybe it'll sell. Maybe it won't. But I know one thing. This time, it'll be honest. And honesty tastes better than sugar ever could. The first time Madison came into my kitchen again. Really came in. Not just to pass through with her phone glued to her ear or to borrow a spatula was for cornbread. I had already preheated the oven when she arrived. She looked different. Lighter somehow. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun. And she wore no makeup. Just a plain denim shirt. An old sneaker. Not the version of her that used to show up to cook content-worthy meals in linen aprons. And faux smiles. "Do you still use buttermilk?" she asked, stepping toward the counter. I nodded. Always. Keeps it moist. We stood side by side. I handed her a wooden spoon. She didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, we mixed, folded, and poured together. Not for an audience. For us. When I slid the pan into the oven, Madison looked over at me. "I used to think I had to outgrow you to become someone," she said. I looked up. She continued, "But I've realized. You were never holding me back. I just never bothered to understand how far forward you'd already come." I didn't cry, but something inside me finally let go. Maybe it wasn't revenge anymore. Maybe it was something sweeter now. The proposal she sent me, our joint cookbook, was picked up faster than either of us expected. Turns out, publishers love a redemption arc. They wanted us to co-write intros for each section. "Tell your story, not just your recipes," the editor said. "That's what readers connect with." Madison balked at first. "I don't want to air everything." I smiled. "Then don't. But tell the truth." She nodded. "Only if you write your parts first." So I did, and I wrote them the way I lived them without apology. I wrote about my first burnt pie, when Carl told me the crust was crispy on purpose. I wrote about saving pennies in a coffee can to buy fresh vanilla extract. I wrote about Madison, too. Not as the villain, but as the woman who made a terrible choice and finally chose to fix it. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Sometimes the people who hurt us are still part of the family we're building. When the first draft was finished, Madison came over for a read-through. We sat at my table, a big pot of chicken stew between us, ladling comfort into bowls like we were two old friends. "I left your story in, just how you wrote it," she said quietly. "Even the part where I made you cry." I nodded, because I did cry. "And you should know that." She swallowed hard. "It hurt to read, but I'm glad you didn't soften it." I shrugged. "If I softened it, I'd still be bending for someone else's comfort." "That's over now." She reached across the table and held my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not just for the recipes, but for acting like your life wasn't worth documenting." I squeezed her fingers, and for the first time in years I let myself believe she meant it. The final version of the book was called Stirring the Past. 2 generations, 1 kitchen. Madison wanted to call it something flashier, but I said, "No. This isn't about selling a brand. It's about showing how we stirred our way through pain and into something better." She agreed. The publisher sent proofs, and we flipped through the pages together. Side-by-side photos. My old recipe cards scanned and printed with notes like, "Don't skip the nutmeg, makes the peaches sing." Her additions were there too. Modern takes, vegetarian twists, gluten-free suggestions. At first I thought it would annoy me, but instead, I felt proud. We weren't erasing each other. We were making room. We launched the book at Riverbend Books, the same store that first carried my solo cookbook. This time, we stood behind the same signing table. Elise introduced us. Today we welcome 2 women, one whose recipes shaped a generation, and one who learned that honoring the past can lead to something truly new. We took questions posed for photos and signed copies until our hands cramped. Afterward, an older woman approached me. "You remind me of my mama," she said, voice trembling. She always said, "Recipes are love letters written in sugar and salt." I smiled. "Then I hope our book helps you read a few more." When the tour ended, I came home and sat in my kitchen alone. The quiet felt like honey. Slow, sweet. I poured myself a cup of tea and opened the thank you notes I'd been tucking away. One said, "I read your story with my teenage daughter. She asked me if she could try making your pecan pie for Thanksgiving. She's never cooked before. Thank you for helping us find a new tradition." Another, "I bought both of your books. My husband says he finally knows what real food tastes like." But one stood out, handwritten, crooked letters. From a girl named Ellie. 12 years old. "I want to be like you when I'm old. You made your own book. That's so cool." I didn't know grandmas could do that. I laughed. And then I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I remembered how long I'd believed I had to shrink to be loved. And now, somewhere out there, a 12-year-old girl was learning to stand tall because of my story. One night, Madison came over with David. He looked at me sheepishly. I never said it back then. But I read the whole thing. I raised my eyebrow. "Which one?" He laughed. "Both. Yours first, then the new one." I crossed my arms, half teasing. And he looked down, then back up at me. "I forgot how much of you I'd taken for granted. You taught me more than I ever gave you credit for." I leaned back in my chair, heart warm, but calm. "Well," I said, "credit has finally been given and received." He reached into his coat and pulled out a framed photo. It was Carl, me, and David, maybe 6 years old, sitting at the old kitchen table with sticky fingers and flour everywhere. "I found this in the attic," he said. "Thought you'd want it." I took it gently, and for a moment, everything that had hurt healed a little more. That weekend, I hosted Sunday dinner for the first time in over a year. Not for cameras, not for clout, just family. Madison brought roasted carrots with rosemary. David brought wine. I brought out my famous buttermilk biscuits and carved the roast like I used to before anyone doubted my place at the table. And as we passed the dishes around, I realized something. This wasn't the same family that once erased me. It was a new one. Still flawed, still messy, but one where I wasn't just invited. I was remembered, respected, loved, and I had cooked every piece of that redemption myself. The first frost came early this year. I noticed it from my kitchen window. The grass dusted in silver, the tips of the garden herbs bowed under delicate ice, and still I stood barefoot in the warmth of my home, coffee in hand, watching the world hush under winter's touch. It felt fitting somehow, a quiet season to end a loud chapter of my life, because for the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing to make myself useful. I wasn't waiting to be asked for help or tiptoeing around someone else's ego. I was just here. Whole. Seen. The second cookbook released in late October. Just in time for Thanksgiving. Stirring the Past made it to 3 different best of the year lists. Elise called, screaming into the phone like we just won the lottery. "I told you people want this," she cried. "Not another trendy chef with truffle oil and 6 ingredients you can't pronounce. They want truth, and your recipes have it." I smiled, leaning against the wall, letting it all soak in. Madison had done her part. She had been on time for every edit. She even went on 2 interviews without spinning the story to make herself look better. And when they asked about the scandal, she didn't dodge it. She said, I took something that didn't belong to me, and instead of denying it, my mother-in-law gave me the chance to earn it back. This book is about redemption and the flavors that helped us find it. I never thought I'd see the day where her voice aligned with mine, but here it was. In print, in press, and in practice. We did a small joint book signing at a community center in Charleston. It wasn't glamorous. Folding chairs, crock pots on tables, one busted microphone that fizzled every time someone coughed. But the people, oh, they were lovely. Older women came up and hugged me like we were old neighbors. Young men asked how to make biscuits, not taste like cardboard. Even kids clutched their mother's copies, pointing to the photos of me and Madison in the kitchen. "You look like my grandma," one whispered shyly. I bent down, smiled, and said, "Then your grandma must be someone real special." That night I found myself flipping through my original book, just me and the pages that started it all. I stopped at the peach cobbler, the same recipe Madison once photocopied and tried to pass off as her own. Now it sat next to her revised version, slightly healthier, with almond flour and less sugar. But the original still held its place, not erased, not overshadowed, honored. That was all I ever wanted, to matter, to be credited, to be remembered. Nancy came by the next morning, waving her copy like it was a prize. "Well, look at you, Elaine," she said, eyes sparkling. "2 books, a nationwide tour, and now a blog post calling you the grandmother of Southern revival cuisine. I might need to start charging you to hang out." I laughed. "Oh, please, you'd eat my biscuits for free until you croak." She leaned in. "So what's next? Gonna open a bakery, teach classes, start a podcast called Get Off My Oven?" I chuckled, but I shook my head. "No, I think I'm done chasing. Now I just want to enjoy what I've already caught." And I meant it. Success didn't feel like a race anymore. It felt like a harvest, the long kind, the kind you wait for, the kind you tend to even when no one notices. And when it finally comes, you sit down, take a bite, and sigh, because you know it's yours. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail from the Southern Women's Culinary Institute. They were naming a new annual award, the Elaine Monroe Heritage Honor, for preserving tradition and inspiring new generations through food. I held the envelope to my chest. The tears didn't come all at once. They waited until I sat down in Carl's old chair and imagined him reading that letter aloud, slow and proud, with that little smirk that meant, "I always knew you were something else." And for the first time in a long time I whispered back, "I know that now too." Madison came by on Thanksgiving morning. This time she didn't bring a dish, she brought something better. A little bound book, handmade, cream-colored pages, handwritten, in ink. "Open it," she said. Inside in her neat print were her favorite recipes of mine, with her own memories added below each one. Under the green bean casserole. I used to think this was boring until I had a baby and realized what comfort food really meant. Under the banana bread. "Made this for David after our first fight. He said it tasted like forgiveness." And under the buttermilk, biscuits. "The first thing you ever let me mess up, the last thing I'll ever take for granted." I closed the book gently. My chest ached in the best way. "This is beautiful," I whispered. "It's yours," she said. "And only yours." We ate with the whole family that night. David carved the turkey. The kids set the table. I made my cranberry sauce from scratch, just like always. And somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the pecan pie, I realized I didn't feel like a side dish anymore. I was the main course, the glue, the soul, the story, and the best part, they all knew it now. Later that night, I sat by the fire, sipping tea with a splash of bourbon. Just enough for warmth, not wobble. I stared at the flickering flames and thought about everything I had lost and everything I had reclaimed. They called me outdated. They tried to take what was mine. They thought my time was over. But I turned their theft into my legacy, their insult into my platform, and their silence into my name on every shelf. They said my recipes belonged in the past. Well, so did their opinions. Because now I feed the future, one page at a time.